What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Embodied Self Love podcast series. I am your host, Elizabeth DiAlto. If for some reason this is your first time that you're landing here in the space, this is the fourth episode in the series. So we covered a little overview to start. We did the self-awareness episode. We did the self-knowledge episode. And now we're getting into part 3 of my embodied self-love framework. And that is about self-acceptance. I love this. So there's 5 parts to the framework. Next week, we'll cover self-trust. The week after, we're going to cover self-respect. And what I love about acceptance is like the bridge for all of it. So per usual here, I am going to be reading off of some notes. So if you're watching here on YouTube, I would say don't judge me, but in the name of self-acceptance, I don't really care. Go ahead and judge me if you want to. I read my notes so that I don't go on unnecessary tangents and I only cover, what needs to be covered here. And I was realizing something. I rearranged my framework. Originally, I had put acceptance first, but as I went to create this series and I started talking about this framework a couple months ago, I actually swapped accidentally acceptance and awareness, and then realized, accident in air quotes, because that was quite divine, because the way it is now, awareness, knowledge, and then acceptance, I believe works more better and makes more sense. But it also just goes to show you that these 5 things are super interchangeable. So, we're covering them in order. This is the order I recommend, but as in everything I ever share, I ever teach here, it really is just recommendation, right? Follow along in whatever order, in whatever way feels good, feels right, and feels true for you. So, as we dive into this, one of the things I've been doing for these episodes, and I've been answering them kind of throughout, I haven't necessarily been calling them out, but I'm going to call a couple out in this episode. I have been posting to my Instagram stories, asking people what questions they have about the topic at hand. And so for this one, someone asked, what does it feel like to have self-acceptance? And I know some of you are in the Embodied Self Love mini course, if you're listening here in real time. And we had the first workshop last week where we covered self-awareness, self-knowledge, and self-acceptance in more depth. And I asked the people in the workshop as well, what does it feel like to you? And people were saying things that I totally agree with. It feels so relaxing. It feels soothing. It feels calming. It feels like relief. I would also add, for me, it feels like truth. It feels just like correct, right? Because none of us were made, built, or put here to be beating ourselves up or being super hard on ourselves all the time. So it just feels correct. It feels appropriate. It reminds me of this quote. I don't know where the quote originally comes from, but I heard my friend Latham Thomas say it many, many years ago, that love is always the appropriate response. And again, this is self-acceptance is part of my self-love framework. So acceptance, gentleness, kindness, compassion, which all those things go together and are functions of each other, is always an appropriate response with ourselves. So without acceptance, there isn't love. There might be something that kind of looks like love, maybe some but it's not real, deep, embodied love if there is not also acceptance. Self-acceptance also requires being able to accept life where you are and in relationship to what's going on in the world, because resistance to what is creates so much unnecessary suffering and struggling. And I've talked about this so much over the years, and people always have various levels of awakening when I mention it. So I wanted to put this at the top of the episode today so that you could really let it sink in throughout the course of the rest of the episode. You can absolutely accept things while also wanting them to be different. So you don't even have to like something or enjoy it to accept it. You don't have to understand something to accepting, because accepting just means not resisting and not fighting against. And I know some of you might hear that and go, but we need to fight against things. And some people really identify with like, but I'm part of the resistance. And that's cool if you identify with those things. What I'm saying is this doesn't mean you don't fight for what you want, but this is an energetic difference in the approach to how you go at things in your life that are not what you want. So this is, for me, this has been absolutely paramount. I just notice that I get much better results when instead of like fighting against everything so hard and with my energy being this energy of opposition, instead I go, well, what's on the other side of that? What do I want to be experiencing instead? And then I fight for what I want to be experiencing. And again, if that doesn't resonate for you, it's cool. I'm not here. You don't need to fight me on it because I'm not going to change my mind about that. That is like a foundational principle I have found in my life works so much better. If it doesn't resonate for you, that's cool. If it does though, or if you're like, what? Because it's going towards the same outcome, but it's putting the outcomes, just putting more focus and energy and attention on the outcome you want rather than on the outcome that you don't. So I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, feel free to write me, ask questions. So again, this is a big energetic difference in how you approach things in your life that are not what you want. And it's paramount because if you're really going to love yourself, it requires some ease and peace. And remember, loving yourself requires, I'm going to start calling these the ABCs. I say it so much. Actions, behaviors, and choices. These are the ABCs. And it's much easier to accept things when they're going well or when they're going the way you think you want them to than when they're not. And 2020, like if you're listening to this in real time, it's August 2020. If you're listening to this, years later, August 2020 here in the United States is like month 4 or 5 of the friggin' COVID-19 pandemic. We had an amazing cultural revolution, the movement for Black Lives. Really, this is not new. This movement has been going on since 2013, I believe, but it really, I want to say, spiked and hit this incredible momentum point 2 months ago in June. So things are so heightened. We have a big election coming up in a couple months in the United States. And I know not all of our listeners are in the United States, but a lot of you are. And we're a world. We occupy the same planet. So our stuff affects each other. Basically, 2020 has been an incredible training grounds for self-acceptance and for acceptance in general because so much is not going the way most of us want it to or would have preferred for things to be going this year. And the metaphor I like to use for this, is it's like swinging the heavy bat. So I grew up playing sports. If you're not a person who grew up with sports in your life, this is a baseball metaphor. So when the on-deck batter, and that's the person who's up next, again, if you're not familiar with baseball terminology, is waiting to get up to bat, they actually swing a bat with a weight on it. And they do that so they could take some practice swings with something heavier than the actual bat they're going to be using so that when they go to swing the regular bat, their swing is going to be so much easier because they were doing practice with something much heavier. So 2020 is basically like the year of swing the heavy bat. I actually wrote it in my notes. I wrote 2020 has given us, and then in caps, a lot of fucking heavy bats to swing. So that's real. These times, they're harder for a lot of people. They're also filled with a lot of grace and ease and transformation if you will let it be. And again, I'm never going to pressure people. This is not about finding silver lining, but it's about going, I personally don't believe that stuff like this happens if we're not supposed to like transmute, alchemize, wake up and get something and get some big things, some big shifts, big healing, big transformation out of it. Because I don't believe in senseless, needless, or unnecessary. suffering or struggling or pain. So I do believe these times are here to expand our capacity. And when I say our, I mean you, I mean me, anyone listening to this, anyone who would land on and be resonating with or still watching or listening to a podcast episode like this, you're in the hour. You're on the transition team, right? So if we can accept that we're all being stretched right now, we can know we don't need to know how. We don't need to know why yet. We can trust that later on, at some point, we'll find out why. And instead, we can stay curious, like we talked about in self-awareness and self-knowledge. So I want to talk about general acceptance for a moment, because they go hand in hand. Self-acceptance is going to require some general acceptance as well. We all come here to heal. So I work in the Akashic Records. And by the way, I'll say this again at the end, but just in case I forget, I mentioned the self-love mini course. You can still join that if you want to. You can actually join it anytime. It's at wildsoulmovement.com/self-love. And I know I just mentioned the Akashic Records. If you are interested in booking a reading, you can go to wildsoulmovement.com/Akashic. But also just go check that out if you're like, what are the Akashic Records? Because I'm not going to talk about that here, but it's all thoroughly explained on that page. So I work in the Akashic Records, and when people come to me for readings and for healing sessions, literally a question that gets asked like in 70% of my sessions, and I do a couple hundred sessions every year, is what's my purpose? And normally when people are asking what's my purpose, they're not asking like in the sense of like higher, like soul's purpose. They're usually first wondering, like, what am I here to do in the context of like their career or their profession? And this is something that I really want you all to accept about all of us, is that we all come here to heal, right? Part of the purpose of coming here, part of why we embody, why we incarnate, you know, you hear the saying all the time, you are a spiritual being having a human experience. We come here, we come into a body to fully embody our soul and to fully express like as much of our soul's essence and wisdom and genius and power and love as humanly possible, right? So the purpose we all share is to be the fullest, most holy, whole, soulful expressions of ourselves, to use our gifts and talents, to love and be loved, to be generous and soft and open, to know our worth, our truth, and live by those things, to know and be who we are, and to allow that to evolve, unfold, and be revealed as we go through each lifetime. And the reason why this requires healing is because we're all raised in families of origin, right? And so we're all molded and shaped when we're pre-verbal. We can't even talk. We can't even say what we need and what we desire. And we're just relying on the people around us to figure it out. And the people around us are, you know, capable of doing that to the best of their abilities. And some people's abilities are not great for a variety of reasons. Some are. Some are like a mix of great and not great. I think most of our parents are probably that. And then we become old enough to have awareness and to have agency and sovereignty and make our own, again, ABCs, actions, behaviors, choices, to have more consciousness around that as we start waking up and things. This is part of everyone's journey. This is part of everyone's purpose. And so part of what we're here to do is to really wake up and embrace and embody and express the absolute fullness of who we are. And so that requires self-acceptance. That requires self-love, because we get so much programming and conditioning. We get so much socialization from the culture, from our families of origin, our schools, our communities, and things like this, that we have a lot of unlearning to do, right? We take things on, we ingest, we digest things that aren't ours, and then we have to come back to discerning what is, and then find the courage to express it, to be it, even if it goes against what people expect from us, what people want from us, and all these kinds of things. So our own self-acceptance is an enormous gift that we can give ourselves, and we're gonna need it if we're gonna fulfill that big main purpose of being who we friggin' came to be. So, and remembering, of course, that, and I think I might have said this in one of the other episodes, I really do I do believe in oneness. We are all one in the sense of, we are all unique expressions of God, the universe, the divine source, however you relate to that big, benevolent, divine expression of all there is. The great beloved is one of my favorite terms for it. I get that from Sufism, from Rumi specifically, where I first picked it up. I love this explanation that there's so many of us because God wanted to be able to experience itself in this many different infinite expressions. So, we just keep coming back to be more and more expressions. And so we got to accept all the things. So let's talk about what acceptance looks like in the tough and in the hard moments, because I don't remember if I already said this, but it's easy to accept things and ourselves when things are going well or when things are going the way we think they should go. But when they're not, when shit hits the fan, when we're faced with things that are not comfortable or easy to deal with or see, that's when we need self-acceptance the most. We need self-acceptance the most when it's the absolute hardest to do. Kind of like a cosmic joke, but this is what we're here to do. So what do we do when we mess up? What do we do when we hurt people? What do we do when we say, I'm going to put this in air quotes, the wrong thing, right? Because right and wrong, everyone has different opinions about that. I personally believe that we always say and do the right thing for the moment, because I believe, again, in that our soul's purpose is to heal and grow. So when we mess up, I also don't believe in mistakes and failure, because I believe any choices we make that don't have the outcomes that we want are because we needed the outcome it had so that we can learn, so that we can grow, we can heal. Sometimes what we need to learn to do is make good apologies, make amends, change our behavior, do repair, be accountable. These are all things that are part of everyone's higher self, everyone's soul expression, right? So real self-love is going to respond. When you are in the place of loving yourself, you are going to be able to respond when you, again, mess up, make a mistake, fail, do the wrong thing. And again, consider all those things in air quotes because they're very subjective. Real self-love is going to respond with kindness and gentleness and forgiveness and compassion, right? And those are all ingredients in self-acceptance. So let's talk about forgiveness for a minute here, or for a couple minutes. Forgiveness has been one of my favorite healing practices for almost a decade now. And forgiveness is energy work. I did a post on Instagram, I don't know, probably like a month ago at this point. And it just says over and over and over again, forgiveness is energy work. Forgiveness is energy work. Forgiveness is energy work. The topic of forgiveness can be really triggering for a lot of people because a lot of people grew up with religious backgrounds where forgiveness was kind of forced on you in a context that didn't feel good. So I want to explain my context and my perspective on forgiveness. We all do a lot of things that we need to forgive ourselves for. Things we've chosen that weren't good for us, roles we've played in situations and experience that hurt ourselves or others, as well as situations that keep us from appreciating, honoring, recognizing, and accepting ourselves. So I'm a big proponent for forgiveness in general. And when I talk about general forgiveness, I am never, ever talking about letting people off the hook for things that they did that were not okay, that they should be held accountable for. I am always talking about taking your energy and taking your power back from how you continue to relate to those things and shifting whatever energy you need to shift around it so that you could be coming from an empowered place, not a victim place. And when I say victim, I don't mean... So there's a difference between being a victim of something and then continuing to behave like a victim. So the difference between being victimized, which many of us have been victimized, we have been victims at some point of something, but then continuing to behave from a place of being a victim is not super empowering. And everyone has to go on their own journey with that. But there's a lot of shame and blame and guilt and stuff that gets all kind of enmeshed and entangled in when we continue to behave as if we are victims when we have been victimized, right? Because it's again, it's an energetic thing. The truth is we might have been a victim of a thing. Some people are victims of things in an ongoing capacity, but if you're at a place in your healing where you can see how you can release the energy around a thing, again, not saying it's okay, but going, I don't want to relate to that thing in that way anymore. This is an accepting approach, because it's like, I hate that that happened, or I hate that that is happening, and I'm going to accept that it is what it is, and I'm going to choose how I'm going to relate to it, how I'm going to connect with it. And again, whenever it comes to choice, sometimes we have choice, sometimes we don't. Depends on where you are in your healing process, trauma, your nervous system, and stuff like that. So there's always important layers of context and nuance that I want you to be putting things for your own experience, right? I'm not making blanket statements. I'm not making like global recommendations for people when I don't know what's going on with you personally. So you always have to put this stuff in your own context, but forgiveness helps us to release the shame we build up in our systems just for living. Just by living a life, we are going to accumulate shame over time. Some of it is ours. Some of it is shame that we've taken on from other people, from experiences, the environments we grow up in. And someone asked this question actually for this episode, how to accept things about yourself that you feel shame about it. And so one of the things, and they quoted back to me something I say all the time, which is it explains it, but it doesn't excuse it. So we can understand why we feel a certain way, but that doesn't excuse our behavior when we're acting out of a place where we want to bury it and not feel ashamed. So a lot of people's shittiest behaviors are because they don't want to feel their shame. They don't want to feel, and they don't want to face the things that they've done. They don't want to be accountable, or they just don't want to feel how awful it feels to have to fully acknowledge a thing. So self-acceptance is like, I wrote something on Instagram right before I was posting, before I hit record on this episode as well, that said self-acceptance is like lube for healing, because it replaces friction and resistance with pleasure and ease, right? It's easier to move through things when we can accept aspects of them. And so part of self-acceptance is to help release shame, and forgiveness is one of the best ways to do that. If you want to go deeper into forgiveness, I spent a good amount of time on this, and I shared a forgiveness prayer with people in the Self-Love mini course. And if you join that through the Embodied Living Center, there's also a healing meditation in the center for forgiveness that I really like. I've been using that with a lot of clients lately, and in my own life actually, and it's just been moving so much energy and creating so much freedom in our systems. So check that out if that is something that you could use. And so this is my answer to this question. How do you accept things about yourself that you feel shame about? Forgiveness. We have to forgive ourselves for all the things we didn't know we didn't know. Last week in the self-knowledge episode, I talked about the 4 stages of learning. The first stage is unconscious incompetence, when we don't know what we don't know. We cannot continue to blame ourselves for all the things we didn't know any better about, right? When we know better, we can do better. But if we don't know better, how on earth would we or could we possibly do better? So we can forgive, we can apologize to those we've harmed, including ourselves, we can make amends, and we could do better afterwards, right? There's this quote that says the best apology is changed behavior. And I love that. I disagree that it's the best. I think part of a great apology is changed behavior. We still need to say the words and show up and actually feel remorse, because anyone can give a bullshit apology, right? We've all been on the receiving end of one of those. Maybe you've given one. So I want to speak to something here. We are not responsible for other people's shame, though as decent humans, it's okay to be accountable and understand why and apologize for it if or when we trigger other people's shame through our ABCs, right? Our actions, behaviors, and our choices. Of course, we say we show up in ways that will trigger other people's shame sometimes. That doesn't make it our responsibility, but when someone brings it to us, it is okay to be accountable and to seek to understand that, to give them the opportunity to forgive you and to take the opportunity to forgive yourself, again, for what you didn't know, you didn't know. And this comes back to a conversation we've had like 100 times in 100 ways on this podcast, and probably will have 100 more times in 100 more ways. And that's the conversation of intent versus impact. The whole concept of shaming people is a slippery slope because it's not on us when people feel ashamed about something they should frigging feel ashamed about. And I bring this up because sometimes it's us. Sometimes we should be ashamed of a choice we made or of our behavior or of something we did. And I think about this a lot in the context of race conversations, which are super relevant right now, especially regarding things like white fragility. So I'm not what I call a full white, and I grew up in a family that on the side of my family that is of European descent, it's mostly Italian, and then there's some German, and there's some Irish. And we never identified as white. I've actually been thinking about this lately. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I think some of you might find this interesting. So, and I don't know if this is like a New York thing, but growing up, I never thought of people as white because we always talked about what everybody was. Like even all my friends, we knew like so-and-so's Italian, so-and-so's Russian, so-and-so's Jewish, like where Italian, German, Irish, the other side of my family is Puerto Rican. Like we were always clear on what people were. And it was never just like this blanket, like that person's white. So I also share that in the context here that I can't fully speak to the white experience. I do get some white passing privileges, but I'm also ethnically ambiguous. And a lot of my life has revolved around not being just one thing and people asking me all the time, what are you? Or being treated, especially by men, like some exotic zoo animal. So it's complex, but this term white fragility, and I know there's a whole book about it. I've never read the book, but I'm familiar with the concept and I understand where it comes from. It comes from like the unconscious biases and things like this. And where we are fragile, and this applies to any kind of fragility, where we are fragile is in the places where we are ashamed. We feel ashamed and we don't want to deal with it. And so often what people will do instead of being accountable is they will center themselves and make it all about their feelings and distract and detract from an issue that actually really needs to be handled, because they're all up in their feelings about what they did wrong. And what I'm saying to you is, if you could replace the fragile response with an accepting response that includes accountability, you will be so much safer for the world. And something I say also a lot is this work isn't just about being safer in the world. It's about being safer for the world, right? Like I got so many notes from people who listen to this podcast and from my students and from my clients back in June when there was a specific 2 weeks, especially when the protests were happening and the movement for Black Lives was absolutely blowing up in this epic way that I haven't seen in my lifetime. Many of us haven't, if you were born after the civil rights movement in the 60s, we haven't seen. And so many people were freaking out and losing their minds and just like scrambling to like suddenly do the right thing or know what to say and become white allies and all these things. And I was getting so many notes from people that were like, oh my God, I am so grateful and I'm so thankful that in your community, we've been talking about this for years, because they just weren't having those fragile responses, and they were facing, it's still hard. It's hard to confront yourself in the places where you don't know what you feel like you should know. But when you're accepting yourself, you can be like, cool, let me learn, right? You don't have to get all caught up in the beating yourself up. You don't have to, you're not the person on people's Facebook threads, like asking questions that you could Google. You're literally on Google being like, okay, let me learn. Okay, let me deal with this. Okay, let me get a book. Let me take a course. You can be so much more self-sourced, self-resourced because, again, you're accepting. You're able to see, damn, this is something I didn't know. This is something I want to be better at, but you're not doing it from this like self-flagellating, I'm the worst place where now the shadow self goes and the ego self is like, I need all kinds of attention and validation to make me feel better. You're like, no, I can accept myself while also realizing I'm not good at this and I need to be better, or I have some real work to do. So self-acceptance, and I use that example because it's like a current, relevant example, probably example that's going to stay current and relevant for a long time, probably for a large part of our lifetimes. I don't know that we'll ever see that fully healed in this particular lifetime, but there's so many things that if we apply self-acceptance, if we could be gentle with ourselves, even when other people are being harsh with ourselves, right? Because when you know yourself, this comes back to the last episode, when you know yourself, when you know who you are, when you know what you stand for, when you know your integrity, you don't need to prove anything to anyone, right? You can accept, you don't need to explain, you are willing to let people judge you, project on you, misperceive you, misunderstand you, be upset with you, and you don't have to take that on. You can literally just get busy doing whatever work you need to do to heal, to be better, to do better, and etc. So this is important. I also want to talk about, there's one more question I wanted to answer from the audience, and I want to talk about the mind and some ABCs of self-acceptance. So some actions, behaviors, and choices you can make to be more accepting to yourself, which again will be easier now that you've learned about and are hopefully practicing more self-awareness and self-knowledge. And I know a lot of you were probably doing that before you ever met this podcast series, but hopefully I've clarified some things for you so you're able to do it better or differently than you were doing it before, hopefully more effectively too. So you can override the low level, not low key. It's actually not low key at all. Usually the low level mental programming that you have, or like the negative thought patterns or thought spirals, the programs that will have you beating yourself up and thinking you're the worst and, having all those types of thoughts with higher level thinking. And the way I describe or I help create or facilitate higher level thinking in my work is the use of mantras. So mantras are repeating thought forms, right? And I'm not talking about in my work, I don't appropriate mantras from other cultures. I don't use like Sanskrit mantras and things like that, and like yoga or anything like that. That's not my practice. I write mantras that are in English, that are just things that we can put in our minds. You're thinking all day anyway. Why not put an intentional thought in there that's going to help you to reprogram the conscious and the subconscious mind, right? So I use mantras to interrupt negative thought spirals that would lead us away from self-love and into disapproval of ourselves, or even self-hatred, right? And so a couple of mantras that I wanted to give you in this episode that you could use. It is safe for me to be who I am is a good one. It is safe for me to be here. It is safe for me to be me. And here in that context can mean like physically here, if that's true, if that's something that you need. Cultivating safety in the system is something that we do a lot in our embodied practices in my work. And then also, and I had posted this on Instagram recently, this was my very first mantra that I made up to help soothe myself back in 2011 when I started working with mantras. I am enough, I have enough, I do enough. Because so often the pressure that we are putting on ourselves to be more, to do more, to have more is not in alignment with our soul. We talked about this earlier. It's not aligned with that divine purpose that we all share. It's often aligned with like ego stuff we haven't healed, expectations other people have put on us, cultural society, programming and conditioning and things like this. So I am enough. I have enough. I do enough. I love this. I love this because any given day, I mean, I'm a Virgo, I'm going to have a to-do list and my moon is in Capricorn. I could outwork a lot of friggin' people and I love working. Any given day, my to-do list, like my team is often like checking in on me and being like, are you sure? And I'm like, I got it, because I personally can get so much done. Some of you have been watching me do this for years and you're like, how do you do that? And I'm like, I'm built for it. But, any given day, my to-do list is going to be much longer than any one person can get things done in a day. So I don't care if I get through it. But when I reach the point in the day where I'm like, I'm done, I'm done. And now after many years of practicing with this mantra, I fully accept that if that's what I was able to get done today, that was enough. And some of you listening to this might be having your mind explode right now because you're so used to like going to bed with the to-do list running through your mind, waking up in the morning and the to-do list is popping right back in, or you're grabbing the phone or like, and feeling that constant pressure to do more, or be more, or have more. No one's soul is putting that pressure on them. I'm going to tell you right now. Okay. The pressure the soul will put on you is to get into alignment, to do what you're here to do, to be who you're here to be. It's not to do more. It's not to like acquire more. It's to be in better alignment. That's the kind of soul the kind of pressure your soul will put on you. Okay. So this also comes to self-acceptance is a great antidote, is a great prescription for perfectionism. And any given day, there might be all these things that you think you should be doing better, things that you think you should know. We talked about that a little bit earlier. If you can learn to accept, if you can start practicing, and this is how we learn, we have to practice, just stopping yourself and being like, you know what, that was good enough. And then, I mean, if you need a practice for this, like you could literally journal, okay, if I'm looking at myself going, that wasn't good enough, I messed up, whatever, can you turn that around? Can you reframe it and go, what if it was good enough? What if that's all I needed to do? Even if you think you messed up, even if you hurt someone's feelings or something, didn't get the outcome or the result you wanted, what if that was perfect? What if that was perfect? This is what acceptance is. Acceptance is looking at something, even when it didn't go how you wanted it to go, and go, could this be perfect? That's a great way to think about it. So there was one more question that I wanted to answer that had been submitted, and then we'll wrap up this episode. Someone said, I'm wondering if you could speak to this thought, idea, phenomenon that I have trouble breaking through. I go through phases where I'll feel really great in my body, strong and confident and capable and powerful. And then I'll see a picture or look in the mirror and something will shift. And I'll watch it happen almost as a third party in my brain and think, what the fuck just happened? I was just so proud of my physical presence. And now seeing this, I have all these places that I'm picking apart. Am I alone in this? Is this common? Thoughts or ideas for breaking this harmful cycle? So I love this. I love this. Yes, this is not you. That's not you. That's your conditioning, especially if you are a person living in a woman's body. Brene Brown talks about this. For women, our biggest source of shame is our bodies. There is so much programming and conditioning around what is the ideal for a woman's body, and it changes over time. I was seeing a man last year who was he was one of my favorite lovers ever. He's like a retired NFL player. He's like 6'5", just this like, he was my like, he was like my Jason Momoa, that like college, that like, primal, just like amazing. So, but I remember him saying to me once, he's like, if this was like whatever time period, I forget the exact period he referenced, your body would be the ideal body. He's like, but we live in, this time period where people are obsessed with like thinness or whatever. So, because he was into, and he called it like real women's bodies. And I don't believe in the term real because we're all real. We're all inhabiting women's bodies. But whatever body you're inhabiting, is friggin' perfect. That's where we have to get. And any thought that's going to come in. There's a meme that says something like problem areas of my body, and it's just one, and it's the mind for thinking there's anything wrong with my body. If you are picking apart your physical experience, it's because it's something that you've learned to do, right? The comparison, the ideals, the norms. One of the things that I've done over the course of my journey of accepting my body, many of you know I used to be a personal trainer. Right now I'm probably like 30 or 40 pounds heavier than I was when I was a personal trainer. And I was also super fit. And again, I'm putting these things, if you're listening, I'm putting these things in air quotes because, by whose standard, right? So by like acceptable societal standards, I was very fit for all of my life up until I was about, I'll say 29, 30. And then I started gaining weight because I shifted my relationship to movement. I moved out to California. I wasn't walking around. I lived in like cities. I was in DC and Baltimore. I grew up in New York. I had been living in Manhattan. I lived in Hoboken for many years. You walk at like 2 miles a day without even thinking, sometimes like 3 to 5 miles a day without even thinking. And so taking that out of my life, like shifted a lot of things. And so it was a real identity shift for me. And so one of the things I had to start doing was normalizing all different types of bodies for women. So this is one thing is also in the mental reprogramming to get to the accepting place is the saying like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You have to expose yourself to a wider range of things and be able to see and find the beauty and the perfection in things in a place that's coming from reverence and respect and honor and acceptance for a wider range of expressions than what we are fed by this culture to believe is the best. I think about this so much whenever I watch any TV show, any movies, because it's still overrun with thin people or like fit people. And it's just like most people are not shaped that way. So it's wild to me where so many of us hold ourselves to standards that just aren't for us. So the mantra I like for this to interrupt that pattern, right? Because again, you can choose ABCs, actions, behaviors, choices. When you catch yourself going into that thought spiral of picking yourself apart, and again, we are talking in the context of body and appearance right now, but you can apply this to anything. You get to go, that's not mine. That is not mine. You took that in, you took that on. It is not yours. So not mine. What is mine, right? And this is why I love the practices that we do in the Embodied Living Center. We do my Wild Soul Movement practice. We do erotic body movement. We do sacred body work. We do healing meditations. We do Wild Soul Sweat. Y'all, I created workout classes this year. I'd been experimenting with them for the last few years, but I started teaching them in the Embodied Living Center. By the way, I changed the name of the Embodied Movement Studio. It's the Embodied Living Center, in case anyone didn't catch that on social media. And these are workouts. I teach workout classes now for people who don't want to be steeped in diet culture, who don't want to be steeped in these standards or people trying to like motivate you to do the thing that they think is good when it might not be your value. And all the other practices are very loving and connective and healing for your relationship with your body. So that's part of the work that I do. My embodiment work is about helping women have an entirely different experience of inhabiting a woman's body. And it's an experience that's rooted in self-love, in self-acceptance, in self-trust, that celebrates the bajillion things a body does other than just look how it looks that are so freaking cool and amazing and miraculous. So part of my answer is, like I already said, you got to expose yourself to a wider range of expressions. Get that normalized, right? Because what you've normalized, what so many of us normalized, not even because it was our choice, because we just see it everywhere, are just these very narrow perceptions of what is beautiful, what is good, what is right. There's no friggin' right or wrong for that. You are right. Each of us are right in our own expression. And then also be replacing, right? Using something, a mantra or something else to replace the negative thought spirals, right? You have to interrupt yourself from picking yourself apart, from blaming or shaming yourself, right? You have to choose more empowering thoughts again, and go, okay. But not just from a place of like bypass. We're not just trying to like bypass, because the way you feel is real. So how do you get yourself to feeling a different way? You got to do the healing. You got to forgive yourself. You got to forgive the culture. You got to like all these things that we've been talking about in this episode really do apply. And then you can actually start experiencing yourself differently. Find things to love. Like, what's amazing about this part of my body? What does this part of my body do, right? I also find connecting in more with the mysteries, with intuition, playing with how does my body's, this is why I teach women how to speak what I call their embodied language. Learn to speak your body's unique language of the senses. Learn how your body is communicating its wisdom with you so you can begin to appreciate your body for so many more things than just what she looks like, you know? So obviously I'm super passionate about that. I could go on and on about it, but I think you get the gist. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. The show notes are at untameyourself.com/341. We'll link up to all the things, the self-love mini course, the Embodied Living Center. I mentioned Akashic Records and embodied healing sessions earlier. We'll link to all of those things. I also mentioned a couple Instagram posts. We'll link to those things as well. I can't wait to hear from you. I hope you feel so loved up on after this episode. I hope you are seeing and feeling truly reasons and ways that you can accept yourself more. And listen, we could always accept ourselves more, right? I don't know that any of us ever get to full self-acceptance. I feel like I plateau out at like 95, 97%. There's still always something lurking there to be like, hey, what about me? And you're like, ooh, you're hard. But you can get there. We can get there, y'all. We could do this. So again, hope you enjoyed the episode. Share it up. I love when you tag me on Instagram in your stories. Leave me comments on my posts about it. Leave reviews for the show wherever you listen. Say hi on YouTube if you're watching the video. All the things. All right. Thanks, y'all. See you later.